On this episode of the Layover Live, Steve Paganelli with Tripadvisor stops by to talk travel safety and recovery. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 126 of the Layover Live, where we bring you the top article from the layover each week. I'm Jason Swick, VP of Digital Marketing, and I'm joined by a very special guest today, Steve Paganelli from Tripadvisor. So, Steve, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's great to be with you.
Yeah, super happy to have you here as well. I know you're a big face of the industry, and it's no coincidence that we have you on the show. As today, our article of the week comes from FocusWire, which is about Tripadvisor's travel safe tool, which we're going to get to in a little bit later. But as you guys know, as we continue towards talking about recovery on this episode, we're going to keep the discussion going moving forward, as recovery has started to slow a little bit with everything that's happening with COVID as of late, but it's still an important topic. Now, over the past several weeks, we've had a number of guests share their various perspectives. We've had DMOs on like Fort Worth and Traverse. We've also had data providers on like Arrivalist and Destination Analyst to talk about their thoughts on recovery. And we've even had our friends at Google come on and talk a little bit about their approach to recovery. But today we're going to talk to one of the biggest companies in the travel space, and that's Tripadvisor. And with that, I'm very excited to have Steve Paganelli, Group Head of Destination Marketing at Tripadvisor. So Steve, for those of you, out there that maybe aren't familiar with you, maybe give a little background on yourself.
Yeah, sure. So as you mentioned, I run the destination marketing team for the Americas at Tripadvisor. My team has the pleasure of working with destinations really across the globe, but specifically those that are based in the Americas or have a presence in the Americas. And my background is, I'm happy to say, almost entirely DMO related. Spent about 13 years leading DMOs before launching a DMO division for a digital agency, and then moving on to Tripadvisor.
Yeah, I was about to say, for the most part, unless you've been living under a rock, you don't know Steve, right? So for those few people, Steve, I appreciate that introduction. But I want to really kind of like hop right into it and really talk about your guys' recent COVID-19 travel study. I really like this report and the fact that it provides really, two key data sources, those around quantitative research and those around site behavioral data, which is kind of nice as well. So I'm going to turn it over to you and really just ask you, what were some of the findings of the study?
Yeah, and thank you for pointing that out, because I think it's one of the unique aspects of this that we looked at that on-site behavior. We also, so sort of what people were actually doing, and then really married that with what they were telling us through traditional surveys. And then actually added a third element, which is looking at the conversations that travelers are having within our forums. So really layering in these three sources. And it's, as you can imagine, I mean, we've been doing this since the start of the pandemic, a massive amount of sort of data and insights and the ability to kind of look at how those things have shifted. One of the things that hasn't shifted that I think is terrific for all of us in the destination marketing space is that travelers have consistently remained excited about travel. Throughout this pandemic, they have consistently indicated that they're looking forward to that first trip post-COVID, however you want to define post-COVID. And almost 70% of them are thinking about where they will go, even though they can't go right now. And I think, and we've seen this, I think, repeatedly, if you go all the way back even to like September 11th and the 08-09 economic downturn, they're going to go whatever the cost. So what we have seen in our studies that travelers are saying, even if my financial situation isn't quite as good as it was going into COVID, I'm going to tap into savings. I'm going to do what I need to do to take that trip because I'm going to need that trip. And in our most recent wave of the study, which was just over the weekend, 2/3 have indicated that they're spending time. And that kind of marries with what we've seen in our on-site in terms of consideration and shopping of destinations and lodging. I think the other thing that is important, and you alluded to it a bit, is we have seen this recent spike in cases in particular parts of the country. And when we ask travelers about the factors that they will consider when choosing a destination, almost half of them say that they are more likely to choose a destination, 47% more likely to choose a destination with a low number of reported cases. So in recent weeks, what we've seen is that some destinations that were consistently showing double-digit week-over-week gains, those that saw those spikes have experienced sort of a flattening, in some cases a decrease in consideration. So So we're very much in the throes of this pandemic, and it weighs heavily on travelers' minds.
Yeah, and very very good insights there too, Steve. And I would agree with you. I think our data as well is showing the same types of things. We're definitely seeing consideration up, but I know definitely some of the areas or the regions of the country that have been hit the hardest as of late seem to be the ones that have been. We've seen kind of a little bit of a slowing down or a pullback. Similar to you guys, I mean, you're at a much larger scale, but we measure data across over 200 DMO websites, which allows us to be able to look at travel intent as well, specifically to DMOs, and we've seen the same type of things on our side. Similar to what you guys have provided also in your study is kind of this phased approach. Now, we're looking at more on our site with our marketing, the new normal. We've talked about the phases as it relates to marketing, right? We feel like we're in this maintain phase, which then will come back into like what we're calling a rebound phase, which a rebound will come back very slowly. That's where we're still living in this world of COVID without really a vaccine or a cure at that time. It'll then evolve back into more of a growth stage where we kind of see some return back to airline demand and things of that nature. So we've done the same thing from a phase standpoint in regards to looking at through a marketing lens. You guys have done it more specifically as it relates to more on the travel as an industry or as a whole type of an approach. So tell us a little bit more about the 5 phases of the recovery that you guys talk about in the study.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And thankfully, there are a lot of these different approaches to sort of looking at the phases that we're inevitably going to go through. As you note, ours is really centered on the industry as a whole, destinations as well. We outlined really 5 phases. The first of those, thankfully, I'd like to think we're all sort of through, which was that decline phase as news and sort of concern about the pandemic really spread. And we started to see declines in traffic, in traveler volume. Businesses obviously felt it as we began to sort of shut down and implement stay-at-home orders. And then the second phase that we sort of define is what we call our plateau phase. And this is the phase where travelers are staying inside, but we've hit really the bottom in terms of that lack of interest or tepidness in travel interest and travel activity. And again, most of the world, with some notable exceptions, Latin America to some degree, Russia and parts of Africa, have also come through this plateau phase. In the Americas, in the US in particular, for us, we sort of define that as March 29th, when we saw sort of a bottoming out of things. The next phase is what we define as the emerge phase. So I think in our white paper we talk about it as sort of the crisis passing, and it's clear, as you noted, that's not happened and probably won't happen really until we have treatments and vaccines. But that lifting of lockdown restrictions is something that travelers have cited as being an indicator of, if not normalcy, at least sort of a new or temporary normalcy. And this really encompasses people going back out in their own communities, visiting and supporting businesses in their home cities, maybe venturing within a 2-hour drive of home, something like that. And then the fourth phase is domestic, where we really are starting to go back out and explore parts of our own countries. In some areas like Europe, we talk really about intra-region travel. So I would actually include that within that domestic phase. And in our research, we have found that travelers think about international flights of 3 to 4 hours in roughly the same way they think about a domestic flight. So even that level you might include in this phase 4. And then the fifth phase, which is decidedly not happening in the near term, is really the return to international travel. That great level of confidence that encourages or supports a traveler's decision to board that long haul flight to somewhere far from home.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think your guys' phased approach is spot on. I agree with you on that. We could be definitely a ways out from really seeing any sort of even domestic demand return, rather even international. So we're probably somewhere in that kind of plateau to emerge phase, right? We're probably sitting between there somewhere. Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, it varies, actually. I think the thing that has been interesting about this pandemic is that we have seen some parts of the world, some parts of even our country, that are in different phases of experiencing the pandemic. And so, I'm someone who actually I started with that first 2-hour trip from home. And then I followed that up a few weeks later with a much longer road trip. And actually, in about 2 weeks, I'll board my first flight. Now, I suspect that I'm at the front end of travelers. Travel sort of, it's my business, it's in my blood. But we are seeing those kinds of signs, and actually, this has been borne out by other research that I've seen from others as well, in terms of the way that travel will return.
Yeah, good point. And certainly, as we think about recovery, it's certainly going to be a collaborative effort across the board. But what, Steve, what role do you think destinations play in recovery specifically?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's a fairly extensive one. I think. I think that destinations sit in a critical position at this moment, and maybe that won't be surprising, because I think often in times of crises, has been DMOs that have sort of stepped in. I think that there's probably three areas that are particularly critical for all destinations. The first being that they need to continue to really inspire and inform travelers who are still thinking about travel. As I mentioned earlier, they've never stopped, and so they want positive stories now. They want to hear positive things, and I think destinations are in the best position to do that. At the same time, it's really important that they're working with their industry to confirm or ensure that they're implementing health and safety practices that will make travelers feel safe and be safe when they're visiting the community. And I think the third one is really around residents. This is an area that I think DMOs really started to think about in the last 18 to 24 months, as we've dealt with responsible tourism and managing tourism volume and visitor volume. And I think an extension of that is the time that we're in. So really rallying and responding to resident sentiments, assuaging fears around visitors coming into the community and bringing the virus, and really assuring them that the industry as a whole, not just the DMO, are taking steps together to ensure that travelers are responsible when they're visiting, and that they're following the behaviors and expectations of that community.
Yeah, I think spot on there.
There's one other thing that I might add to that, actually, Jason. Sorry to cut you off, but we're also seeing destinations start to think about things like certification programs. And I don't think that's necessarily something that every destination needs to undertake. But I think what we're seeing at the state level, some destinations talking about that. We're certainly seeing some of those conversations at the country level. LAX just announced a week ago that they're pursuing independent certification of their health and safety practices for travelers. So I think that's something we're going to see more of, and we're starting to see it surface as a visitor expectation in some research as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this whole common theme, whether it's a traveler, right, or it's the residents or whatnot, is that safety is at the forefront of all this and how we're thinking about all of these things moving forward. And really, this kind of brings up the next topic I want to get into, which is really your Tripadvisor's travel safe initiative, which I think is an excellent way to do this. Right, it's an opportunity to connect businesses with travelers and let them know about what's happening from a safety perspective, and then allows a community as well for those that have experienced a particular destination to share their thoughts and reviews as it relates to those topics. So I'm going to let you get into that. Tell us a little bit more about your travel safe initiative.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Travel Safe initiative really grew directly out of what we were hearing from travelers in our research. 65% of respondents to our studies said they wouldn't travel until they saw physical changes that really made them feel safer. And one of the things they cited was having information available on platforms like Tripadvisor that made it easy for them to understand what were the practices in place. So our Travel Safe initiative launched, I guess it's about 2 weeks ago now, for lodging, a little over a week ago for restaurants, and it will launch for attractions in the next few weeks. And what it does is it puts the power in the business owner's hands to list the practices that are in place. There's a checklist. We've worked with a number of different organizations and sort of building out what are the various practices that are recommended and that businesses are putting in place. And then the business simply indicates which of those practices they have in place. That creates the ability for the traveler then to actually filter search results based on particular safety practices that are important to them, or simply businesses that are doing anything around safety. And then the third element, again, that we sort of heard directly from consumers is encouraging travelers to talk about the health and safety practices they encounter at businesses within their review content. So we've actually amended our review submission or review collection form so that there's a place for travelers to share those kinds of experiences.
Yeah, it's again, I think the initiative is a step in the right direction. It provides, again, both sides to be able to comment on those things, and I'm really curious to see how that plays out. So then wrapping up, I think, one thing we've stuck with is advice for DMOs out there. And again, being one of the larger footprints in the travel industry, Steve, what specific advice do you have for DMOs out there?
Yeah, it's a critical time. And I think a lot of DMOs are really struggling with, what do I do now? What do I do later? What is the timing for all of these different things? I think that one of the first things is really to kind of take a page from the past in some ways and tap into locals, to invite friends and family to visit. Multiple studies suggest that the first trips we take are going to be visiting friends and family that we haven't been able to see. So it's a great place to sort of enlist the local community support in those efforts. I think also leveraging your CRM systems, your email list, your social channels to reach those travelers who already have an affinity for and a familiarity with your destination, who also might represent some of the first visitors coming back. I think that's especially true if you're a destination that typically has sort of high repeat visitation, or if you're a destination that maybe is dependent on flight arrival, for instance. Going to sort of those tried and true audiences with whom you have existing relationships is a really good place to start. There's probably no way to not make it sound self-serving for Tripadvisor, but go where travelers are, where they're thinking about traveler, where they're demonstrating intent, and I think where they place trust. We've long heard, I think going back to the mid-90s, that content is king. I think in the environment we're in, that is going to be paired with trust, and trust is really going to be king in this environment. And then I think, and I mentioned it earlier, just continuing to inspire travelers with positive stories, from the destination, be it about your people or your places, that really help travelers have a sense of sort of positivity about the destination. It's something that has come up again and again in the research that we've conducted, that they're looking for positive places to turn, because so much of the news is just sort of weighing us all down. And I think destinations are so well positioned to share those great, inspiring, positive sorts of stories.
Yeah, I think great advice, Steve, there. I agree with you on the positivity. It feels like this thing has been going on now for so long. And to your point, the news cycle has been, it feels like negative story after negative story. And I think sharing those positive stories with all of us wanting to get back to travel. So when you do have that good experience, making sure that as a destination, you're finding ways to amplify that message and let people know. So Steve, thanks for coming on today and sharing that information. And if you haven't seen it, guys, go check this stuff out. Their study is fantastic. Participating in and sharing that with your partners around their Travel Safe initiative is something else you should be checking out too. So Steve, thanks again.
Thank you very much, Jason. Great being with you.
You bet. And thanks for tuning in. If you're not subscribed, please do so now. We are also available on Spotify and iTunes if you'd like to consume us through podcasts. So thanks for tuning in, everyone. We'll see you next time, and have a great day.